Good morning and welcome to Community Conversations. I'm Vicki Green. Today we're talking about veterans, struggles, and important help to combat homelessness, substance abuse, and mental health issues. Most of you probably know someone who is serving or has served, or you have a family member that's been in the military. Some of the data may not surprise you, but what's happening in Massachusetts and around New England might just surprise you. So joining us today to fill us in on the current status and help for veterans in the area is Dennis Leary, not to be confused with comedian Dennis Leary. They're both from Worcester. Good morning, Dennis.
Good morning, Vicki.
You must get that 100 times a week. And you spell it the same way?
Yeah.
And you're both from Worcester?
Yeah, we're both from Worcester.
Crazy. So, Dennis, you are the executive director of Veterans, Inc.
That's correct.
Which is based in Worcester but has programs in all 6 New England states.
Right, we do, Vicki. Yep.
Okay. And, Dennis, you're joined by Erin Daly-Stelmack, who is the Director of Communications and Community Outreach for Veterans, Inc. Welcome, Erin.
Good morning.
Great to see you both. Now, Dennis, you've been with Veterans, Inc. for 19 years, but in 2017, you were a part of opening and now head up a new facility called Independence Hall, which we're going to get to.
Okay.
It's a first-of-its-kind facility. We're going to go talk a lot about that. But can you set the stage for us? What do you think are the biggest misconceptions people have about veterans?
Well, Vicki, thanks for asking that, because that's a really good question. I think there's a couple of misconceptions that a lot of folks have. Number one, I think they think that a veteran means someone who was in combat in another part of the world, and that is not true. Although there are many combat veterans, men and women who have served on active duty, not all veterans actually see combat. But at the same time, I think what we all have to appreciate is, they raised their hand, they took the pledge, and they were willing to put their life on the line for all of us and had no idea where their military service might take them. And so I think that's a huge, act of selflessness on their part, really, to help all of us.
Okay. So at Veterans, Inc., you have a saying that you treat a triangle of needs: housing, employment, and health. So first, let's talk about housing and homelessness among veterans in New England and Massachusetts. There's some data that we were looking at that I pulled off Forbes.com that was done back in November. The overall number of homeless veterans, according to this data, decreased in 2018 nationally, which is a good thing. However, they found the number increased in several states. They took the top 10 that increased in, and 4 of them were New England states, with Massachusetts and New Hampshire both seeing an increase of homeless veterans of approximately 15%. In Vermont, they're saying approximately 11%. And in Rhode Island, approximately 8%. Now, the article talks about higher housing costs, and we know New England is expensive, and that's a factor. But does that data represent what you're seeing? Are we seeing an increase in homeless vets in New England?
So, Vicki, there is definitely an increase in homelessness among the veteran population. I think, though, it's probably a temporary increase, and I think that it's due in large part to what you said, the incredible rise in housing costs, and also the lack of affordable housing for veterans, especially in central Massachusetts. Our staff who are trying to help veterans find affordable housing are running into that day in and day out. I think, though, when you have data like this, Vicki, it takes some time to clearly evaluate the reason for these things. And, we're close to the vanguard of all these issues. And we're thinking that the opiate epidemic is also playing a role because, if you become addicted, you can probably say goodbye to your job at some point early on. You're going to lose your income. You're going to lose the place that you're living. And so I think there's these other factors that have yet to be clearly identified.
No, it's interesting you talk about that. Now, Veterans, Inc. in Worcester, we're going to talk about Independence Hall, which is in Shrewsbury, but Veterans, Inc. in Worcester has been around since when?
Yeah. So
what year?
Yeah, so we've been in business now for 28 years.
Wow.
Yeah, long time.
And so for people that aren't from the area, if you've been to downtown Worcester and you're getting off the highway to go to the DCU Center, if you come off the highway and take a right, the building is pretty much maybe like 1/8 of a mile around the corner.
Right.
And having been someone I'm a big cheerleader for this area and for this city, though I did not grow up here. I grew up in Metro West. And I love the city. However, some things don't change. And I know from the 90s, you might hear people talk about, well, I know where Veterans Inc. is because I drive down the street and I see everybody hanging out, smoking a cigarette.
Right.
How many beds are in there? And let's talk about what's being done inside that building, because I don't really care who's outside. What's going on inside?
Yeah, Vicki, that's so good of you to bring up that point, because unfortunately, we occupy what was known as the National Guard Armory. The building is, well over 125 years old, so it's kind of a historic landmark for the city of Worcester, and in many ways a landmark for us, because that's where we made our first effort to begin to help veterans. And it is kind of sad and unfortunate that we just have this literal postage stamp of land around the building. So there is no way for the veterans to go. And unfortunately, I think that sometimes presents a poor image, because folks drive by and they'll see the guys out having a cigarette break, and they automatically think, wow, what a odd-looking place that is. But really what they don't see, and we invite people, I should tell you, to stop, come in, introduce yourself, and say you'd like to learn more about us, because once you're inside the doors, the dynamic set of activities that are going on inside of that building is just enormous. And the place is full of energy and excitement. And I'm going to tell you another important word, Vicki, and that's happiness. Because a lot of veterans come to us and they're down on their luck, and they've encountered some really difficult problems. They may have been loss of family, loss of employment, loss of housing. And the first thing they encounter when they walk through our doors is what we call a veterans culture. They may have been out of the military for 20 years, but when they walk back into that building, the way it's structured, the way the staff conduct themselves, right away it kind of triggers this memory of a good memory of when they were in the military, a time where things were easy to understand, regimented though they might have been. It was easy to understand your place, what was expected, where you could go for help, and more importantly, how you asked for help. And so right away, a conversation starts, and sometimes a conversation is the beginning of a relationship, hopefully a healthy one. And that's what's going on inside the building, that motorists and folks from the area who don't stop inside, they never get to witness that. But we're talking the full gamut, Vicki, from psychosocial evaluations to really get a handle on what the veteran needs, all the way to the end of trying to find permanent housing, employment and training, and ultimately, in many cases as we can, family reunification.
How many beds? You have a shelter in there.
Yeah, so they still use the name shelter. We've tried to move away from that, but I think we're stuck with that label. No, that's okay. That's all right. What you call it, it's transitional housing, but I don't want to, So we have 85 beds inside of that building.
Wow.
And that's, I think when people hear that number, it gives them a better appreciation for how busy it must be inside.
No, definitely does. Yep. So there's a food pantry at Veterans Inc.
For veterans, for veterans and veterans' families, and it's the third Thursday of every month. Right. Yeah, right there. So if you ever drive by on the morning of a Thursday and you see there's a lot of cars out front, those are the cars of the people coming for our pantry, and we serve a tremendous amount. I can't recall the number offhand. I don't know if you know.
At least 600 families in the community that we help every month.
600 families for food. And those aren't people that are being housed there. Those are people that come just for...
these are folks who have their own place to live.
Okay.
Yep.
All right. So there's outpatient counseling there. There's transitional housing for them to live.
Yes.
What about for female veterans?
So,
do you have a program for them?
What we seem to develop over time, Vicki, is this, a relationship with the Catholic Church. And I'll tell you why. Because our property up in Maine, our property in Shrewsbury, our property over on Cambridge Street in Worcester were all former church-related buildings. So when you mention female veterans, we're really so happy to be able to say that we're the first veterans organization in the country to open up a program for female veterans and their children.
Oh, wow.
And we're doing that at the former Sacred Heart Church convent. A few years back, the diocese was encountering some fiscal issues.
You're talking about in Worcester?
Yeah, here in Worcester, I'm sorry. The Diocese of Worcester was encountering some fiscal issues, and there's a question of Sacred Heart Church, what's the status going to be? And I think in an effort to help raise revenue for the church and the parishioners, they decided that the convent, which had not been used for over 10 years, they decided, why don't we try and sell this building? They contacted us, and it turned out to be a perfect facility for our female veterans and their kids. And we also had, for the longest time, a small preschool on the lower level.
Wow.
Yeah, so the moms could kind of go back to work or school. Kids could go downstairs to be in preschool for half a day. Yeah, and it's a great facility, and it's still pretty busy. busy today.
Okay, so how do people get referred? I mean, I think there's a pride too, and I don't know if it's just veterans, but I've seen homeless people say to police, "No, I'm not going to a shelter."
Yeah.
They're too, and I don't know if it's pride, if that's the right word, but as somebody who was observing it one night, that's what it looked like to me.
Yeah.
They're saying, "I can take care of myself."
Right.
So these veterans come back and they had to be self-sufficient, but also part of a team. And you're trained to, it's ingrained in you to
Right.
cover your men or your women, your
Right.
team.
Right.
So when they come back, how do they get referred? Are people afraid sometimes to come in? Is it their family? So if somebody listening knows somebody that could use outpatient counseling or
Right.
housing.
Yeah, so that's an excellent point, Vicki. And of course, veterans are human beings, and so they get anxious and they can be intimidated as well, especially with something they're not familiar with. And there's always a little bit of discomfort in that you're asking for help, because that says so much about your situation. And there are a lot of people who will feel self-conscious about that. So there is a little bit of reluctance on the part of some folks to kind of come forward, which is the other reason, as I mentioned earlier, why we try to create an environment that is so welcoming and pleasant that once you step inside our door, it doesn't feel like a big deal at all to kind of connect with us. And I'm not sure if that addresses the detail of your question or not, but I think
it does. It definitely does. I think, now you had talked briefly about opioid, and so your triangle, we did the housing. Now we're going to talk about health.
Yeah.
And I don't want to talk about physical health because that's something people can see, unfortunately.
Right.
If people come back injured, and that's a whole ball game for caregivers and family and all of that. But behavioral health, so drug abuse, opioid epidemic, suicide, is it worse with veterans now? And is there a difference in occurrences from older vets that maybe served in Vietnam? And you see a lot of that even in movies.
Right.
I'm thinking of Forrest Gump and things like that. But are the occurrences of drug abuse, and is there any difference between veterans that served back in Vietnam to veterans that served maybe in Iraq in the 90s, in Panama, Afghanistan?
Right. Well, Vicki, there is a difference. And although I might be painting this with a broad brush, I think your Vietnam veteran era, you tend to see a higher preponderance of alcoholism for those among that population that have a substance addiction problem. There's a higher probability it may be alcohol related. The younger generation it tends to be more in the opiate end of the spectrum. And I would like to say that I know the reason for that. I don't. I think it has a lot to do with what they were exposed to, the culture they grew up in.
The younger?
The younger veterans grew up in a culture where access to opiates was pretty easy. And
is it easy over in the military too?
Well,
from what you hear?
well, no. And I think that's an important thing that kind of triggers the alcoholism issue, because in the military, it's grounds for immediate dishonorable discharge if you're found to be using illicit drugs. Alcohol use.
That include marijuana?
Yes. Alcohol use, a little different, and so, my daughter is on active duty in the United States Navy. She's a flight doc out in San Diego.
She's a surgeon. She's a flight surgeon, right?
Yeah, and so she's getting out.
Wow.
She's getting out this summer. But, I in addition to speaking to her, I think it goes without saying that alcohol use in the military has always been part of the culture, and I'm not being critical when I say that. I think it's just a fact of life for the military, because alcohol use is accepted in the military, and that's fine. Again, I'm not being critical about that. Illicit drug use is not accepted in the military, and it's grounds for discharge. And so there's a tendency to kind of really avoid using illicit drugs in the military because of the consequences. However, who needs opiate pain reduction more than someone who's been wounded in war? And so these are our veterans, our men and women, who served their country, got injured in battle. And, these poor individuals now have legitimate pain. They have legitimate need for some pain reduction, which leads to, the typical, medications that you know about, oxycodone and Percocets, et cetera. In a certain number of cases, as you know, that leads to an abuse of those medications. And eventually, when the prescriptions run out and now you find yourself pretty much addicted to opiates, you got to turn somewhere for that. And if you don't turn to recovery, you're turning to the easiest, most accessible version of opiates, which is heroin.
And that doesn't surprise me. However, it does surprise me that, I mean, again, it's one thing to watch a movie and see how the military is portrayed, because most of the older movies, well, not older, but 90s that I'm thinking of, there's a few. They're always got a cigarette in their hand while they're in the trenches, or I've heard of marijuana use over there, and now because it's legal in certain states, that doesn't mean it's legal in the military.
Right.
However, I think getting that is, from what I've heard from people in the military, easier. Do you think that? So your program is obviously going to serve that, and so is Independence Hall. But before we get to that for the rest of the show, I just want to touch on suicide.
Right.
I did a whole show on suicide in general, right? And we talked more about teens and the increase in school and pressures and such. But are there suicide rates higher for veterans?
So a few years ago, the VA and I believe the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Administration did a national study on the rate of suicide, and it was shocking because for a long stretch of time, there are over 20 veterans a day were taking their life.
20 a day?
Yeah, I know.
How long ago?
This is 4 years ago.
Oh my God.
And so when you hear that statistic, that just kind of knocks everybody off their chair, right? Now, that number has gone down. I do not know the latest research, and I'm not even sure if it's been published yet. But so that clearly is, a place for concern.
No, wait, is it 20 a day nationally?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep.
Just want to.
Oh, yeah, not here in Central Mass.
No.
Right, yeah.
Or in Massachusetts or in New England. I just want to clarify.
I'm so sorry. That's a national.
It's still a very high national number.
Yeah, right.
Is it different between men and women?
Yeah, the majority happen with men.
Yeah.
Yep.
And why do you think that is?
I wish I knew the answer. I think there's a sense of, globally, I think when there's a sense of expectation on the part of men leaving the military, to succeed at a certain level. But again, Vicki, part of this is anecdotal, and there are no hard, fast answers. There's some research that may give you information to maybe you can make a better guess at it.
No, it's just from what you're hearing, because you're involved with veterans, male and female, from different serving here domestically and abroad, and you hear stories.
Right.
So,
but I want you to understand that we do not see the epidemic of suicide that I just tried to explain was happening 4 years ago. That is not what we're seeing. What we're really seeing is that, as you probably know, the leading cause of death in our country right now for anyone 50 years old and younger is opiate overdose. So for us, suicide is really not the issue. The issue is trying to treat what's right in front of our face here, which is the opiate epidemic.
And I know you're on our District Attorney Joe Early's task force for that.
Yeah, Joe's a great guy.
Yeah, and I had State Representative Jim O'Day, and we talked an entire show about that because he was very open about being a recovering addict. Yeah. And it was quite a show, and he's been doing phenomenal things at the State
Jimmy's
House
a great man.
on homelessness and on,
Yeah, real advocate.
Yes. So we did a great show on opioids. So I'm not putting it aside, because it's definitely an issue, and you're making that point.
Yep.
But I think what that leads us into is Independence Hall,
right?
Which, for people that aren't from the area, it's 22 acres, which I didn't know, because from the street it doesn't look like 22. It's in Shrewsbury, Massachusetts, which is very easy to get to off of Route 9. If you keep going west of Natick and west of Framingham, Southborough, and Westborough, you'll end up in Shrewsbury, and it's about a mile off, and it used to be the religious Cavalry Retreat, right? And it's across from Southgate, which a lot of people know because in this region, because they have family that are in this retirement.
Right.
It's a giant facility across the street, but 22 acres, and it opened in 2017, right?
That's correct.
And you're in charge of it, and it's the first veterans licensed addiction treatment center in the country.
Right.
That's actually operated by a veterans nonprofit. That shocked me.
Yeah, isn't that amazing?
Yeah.
It still continues to shock me.
Yeah, first in the country, and you're doing it right here in Massachusetts.
Right.
So please explain why do you call it Independence Hall? Your treatment team of your social counselors and social workers and psychiatrists and psychologists You nicknamed them the Recovery Renegades.
Yeah.
Why?
Wow, this is all coming back to haunt me now. So
No, I love it, but I want to know why.
Well, the truth about the Independence Hall name, I would like to think it was more clever than the real story, but the real truth is that a bunch of us had just finished watching the series about John Adams and the history of our country, and Independence Hall was on our mind, and I guess the other indirect meaning of the words independence, really came to our mind as representing what we were really trying to help individuals accomplish. That is a sense of independence from some of the things that may have been troubling them in life and holding them back, and obviously independence from addiction, to actually help folks to be in a healthy recovery. So that was really the genesis of the name. Yeah.
But what about the treatment team being called Recovery Renegades?
So,
I mean, they're not renegades in the sense that
Right.
what you mean that it's maybe a non-conventional approach to helping people?
Yeah, Vicki, you hit the nail on the head. It really is. We've created somewhat of an unorthodox approach to treatment, and by that I mean that we really put the person first. And I invite you to come out sometime, and you can experience this
I'm going to. I drive by it, and I haven't seen the actual building.
Yeah, you got to come in. It's first of all, the facility is spectacular. It really is spectacular. The VA helped us purchase it. They helped kick in half the cost of it. But then the state of Massachusetts really supported the renovation of that building. Thank goodness they did, because it is really a state of the art building, fully handicapped accessible. It really is magnificent inside. And why am I telling you that? Because part of the Recovery Renegade concept is that you're going to feel different when you come there than you did at other facilities. And by that I mean, from the moment you walk in the door, you're greeted with warmth and a heartfelt sense of attention and comfort. And the last thing we're going to do is make you feel any shame whatsoever. That is the opposite of what Independence Hall is all about. And in fact, I know this is a radio show, but you can see I'm wearing a denim shirt today.
He is.
And this is
We're hanging
that's
out.
because we go with this concept called dress the same. What do I mean by that? We don't have staff walking around with a suit and tie and a vest all buttoned up, because our feeling is, this is part of the renegade mentality.
No white coat.
But, my friend Jack Maroney had a lot to do with this concept. Jack helped us to develop this whole thing. And really the thought is, we want people to feel comfortable with whom they're talking to. We don't want anybody to feel, even from a visual sense, that the person they're talking to is talking down to them. So our staff, dress in many ways similar to the clients who are coming to us for help. And so right away, there's a kind of a sense of camaraderie that gets built. It's like, wow, you and I they don't even say this in words, but that's unconsciously what happens. And, from the moment you walk in the door, as I said, the receptionist, gives you a warm welcome. There's a little cafe right inside the door called the New Leaf Cafe. As corny as that sounds, you're going to turn over a new leaf.
Yeah, no, I've heard about that.
Yeah, and so, you're invited to sit in the cafe for a while, and there's some music there.
How many beds?
And so we have a total of 70 beds at that facility. 32 are intensive inpatient substance addiction treatment.
So they stay there
And they stay there for a period of 2 weeks.
2 weeks, okay.
And then the other beds are transitional housing for veterans who are seeking to kind of stabilize and move on to permanent housing. But the additional addiction services we have are not only outpatient counseling, which typically happens just once a week. We also have a day treatment program where you can come for half a day. You'll sleep at home at night because you're stabilized. Your recovery is at that point where it's okay for you to be home. But you'll come back to us every day for 2 to 3 weeks, and you'll be involved with individual sessions, group sessions, educational sessions. But most importantly, you'll be involved with a sense of comrades and friends, and there's a sense of support just by going to be with people who are going through what you're going through.
Okay, so just so we get all this in here, do people need insurance?
So no, you do not need insurance.
Wow.
The state of Massachusetts is let me tell you real quickly, if you're going to be a veteran, Move to Massachusetts. There are more benefits in thank God to our legislative delegation, and for years these things have been placed. And
one of them is
our governor,
Seth Moulton, is a
right. And Seth is a great advocate for veterans, obviously being one himself. But there's this thing in Massachusetts called the Chapter 115 law. No, and I know what I'm talking about because every year we go to Washington D.C. for the annual convention of all veteran providers like Veterans Inc. We are the envy of every other state, excuse me, because of this Chapter 115 benefit, which in Massachusetts provides financial support to any veteran who has suddenly fallen down on his or her luck. They're unemployed for a period of time. Each municipality in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts provides them with a subsidy each month, which gets reimbursed by the state of Massachusetts. So the towns are not out any money. And so, that is an amazing benefit because that really helps us to get a veteran back on track quicker than any other state in the country. So it's a huge, huge benefit that we have.
All right. So they come in and they go for 8 days. The other thing is, what if someone has a loved one come back and they say they're fine, but they know they're not acting like themselves? Maybe they're not open about having PTSD or nightmares or trauma. I know a few that are going through this, and some are more vocal about it than others. Right. Are people ever overlooked? What can you do if somebody listening right now has a veteran, has a friend, a family member that needs some help?
Right. Well, I think Erin is probably going to give you our identifying number, or somebody will give our identifying phone numbers and website
yes, we'll
in
put
a moment.
Website up.
That's probably the easiest way to access us. But in addition, the VA. The VA has gotten a bad rap in some cases in different parts of the country. But
Hospitals.
Right. Yeah. But I can tell you the VA in Massachusetts really goes to bat for their veterans, especially when there is medical and PTSD issues present. We have become, in many ways, the community-based service to veterans because you can access us quicker, especially with substance addiction. But for bigger, more pronounced medical problems, we definitely encourage every veteran to access the VA. And here in Central Massachusetts, you can drive into the Lincoln Street VA clinic any day during the week and just say you're a veteran there and you'd like some help, and they'll register you and get you lined up for all the benefits that you need.
No, that's important. That's important to know.
Yeah.
So, and there's, like you said, there's been a lot going at the state level, and unfortunately we don't have time to go into it, but the governor did sign into law an act called the BRAVE Act, which provides incredible funding and services. And it also looks at, gold medal, they call them gold medal wives, right? Is that right?
Yeah, Gold Star families are those who unfortunately have lost a son or daughter, who died on active duty.
Yeah, and I know a few, and they become passionate about that. But
of course,
but as you said, the state legislature and our legislative delegation in D.C. has been very strong, and that's good to know.
Right.
So now let me just wrap up with Erin. Erin, you have, I'm sure, a bunch of upcoming events, and I know Memorial Day is coming up. What is the thing about Memorial Day that you were telling me that I think a lot of people maybe misunderstand the difference between Veterans Day and Memorial Day?
Well, I think they confuse Veterans Day and Memorial Day. Veterans Day is, and Dennis, you can jump in if you'd like, but I feel that Veterans Day is more a day of celebration and thanking veterans and recognizing their service. And Memorial Day, if you think about it in the true sense, is recognizing the memory of those who passed, that served, and that are no longer here. So they died. So it's not. It's much more of a somber event.
And we don't want people just to think of veterans on both those 2 days.
Right.
I just Memorial Day happens to be coming up.
Exactly.
But now you have a couple of events coming up. Why don't you tell us? We have a quick 2 minutes.
We do. We have events throughout the year. We're already starting to work on events that are happening in November. But just around the corner, we have on May 8th, out at Heritage, we have our 22nd annual charity golf tournament.
Wow.
So for the golfers
and where's
out
Heritage
there,
for the people?
Heritage is in Charlton.
Okay.
It's out
Route
in Charlton.
20.
Yeah, we've done it there for many years. It's a huge event for us, a fundraiser that we rely heavily upon its success to continue in our mission, because our goal is to be as independently financial that we can be.
Okay. And then you have a stand down event, which
Super
is
important
coming up
event.
in June.
June 14th. That's our 14th.
Sounds like it's far
annual.
away, but it isn't.
No, it's really
30 seconds, explain it.
Yeah, it's an event only for veterans. It's geared towards veterans in need. Predominantly, veterans from the homeless population will attend and their families. We have over 70 vendors that will be providing services and goods to veterans.
So if you have vendors that are interested, they can go to the website. What's the general website?
Veteransinc.org.
Easy. Veterans.
Veteransinc.org. We also have an 800 number, which is 800-482-2565.
And that number's on the website too.
It is.
So veteransinc.org. You can't get any easier than that. So I want to end the show with we could go on for hours, and I wish we could because I'm passionate about this population for many reasons. But it's a quote that I took from your mission statement. So let's end with this. The quote is, "They were there when we needed them. We must be there now that they need us." So I think that says a lot about your organization. So I'd like to thank Dennis Leary, the Executive Director of Veterans, Inc., and the Director of Independence Hall, which is in Shrewsbury, Massachusetts, Central Mass, and Erin Daly-Stelmach, who's the Director of Communications and Community Outreach at Veterans, Inc., and it's veteransinc.org. So thank you both for coming in.
Vicki, thank you very, very much.
You bet. That's Community Conversations. I'm Vicki Green. Have a wonderful day.